Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ladies of the PGS. I am your host, and thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's the second episode of Ladies of the PGS. And of course, I'm going to be covering this topic that I picked regarding explicit scenes. But before I get to that topic, I just want to say hello to everybody out there. Hello, Tom Jr. Jackson, my collaborator and moderator, and to everybody in the chat. Thank you so much for stopping by tonight. And as all of you know, Queen Elizabeth's funeral service did take place today. With thousands in attendance and practically the whole world watched that service today. Her final resting place will be in Windsor Castle, and it was a final goodbye to a queen whose life touched so many guys. Certainly one of the most watched and attended funeral services I have ever seen. I certainly am going to wish the new king well. So that is happening, as well as the fact that New York Comic Con, for those of you who are attending New York Comic Con, it's going to take place the first week in October of 2022 at the Jacob Javits Center in New York. They are going to be allowing you to make reservations for panels that will take place on Monday, September 26th, guys. So on Monday, September 26th, 2022 at 12 p.m. Eastern, if you have tickets to New York Comic Con and you want to make reservations to certain panels, do please put that on your calendar. That's when you can go in. And I think that they've done away with the lottery. I'm not quite sure what the process is. Maybe some of you know in the chat, but whatever the new process is, I have to tell you guys, I am so excited to attend New York Comic Con. There is going to be the Next Generation panel, and I'm sure there's a lot more in the panels coming up, and I probably will cover some of what's going to be in the panels for New York Comic Con coming up. I'm so excited for this event. Also, Andor. Andor premieres on Wednesday, September 21st, 2022. My goodness, guys, that's this week. This week, Andor is they're gonna drop 3 episodes of Andor on Disney Plus. They promised us that it was gonna be dark and grittier. I don't know about you guys. I can't wait for a dark and gritty Andor, and also to find out more about Mon Mothma and the entire Rebel Alliance, I guess, which will be at this point, if they even have formed. No matter what it is, this really is going to be a very exciting show. I cannot wait to see it. So let me know if you guys are interested or excited for that show as well. 3 episodes. I think it's going to be at 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Wednesday morning. And I may stay up to watch it. I don't know. It depends on how I'm feeling that night. Regardless, it's going to be a fun event to even have the community participate in. People will be up. I certainly do want to take part in that. So, getting to my main topic, guys, it has to do with House of the Dragon. And I've been watching House of the Dragon, and I have been enjoying House of the Dragon so much. I don't know how you guys feel about House of the Dragon. Have you been watching it? They just dropped episode 5 on HBO Max. I thought episode 5 was their best episode ever. I love what they're doing with House of the Dragon. I can't say enough about it. And of course, there have been some questions about some of the scenes and the way that it's filmed, just in comparison to, let's say, Game of Thrones. Certainly, House of the Dragon has been such a spectacular show. I just love what they're doing. And so, I just was curious whether or not any of you have been watching it as well. So anyway, my main topic for tonight has to do with House of the Dragon, as I mentioned. And am I still? Yes. Couldn't see if you could see it. It has to do with these intimacy scenes. And, my question is, when you get an article like this where House of the Dragon has intimacy coordinators, which seems to be something that is good for the industry, for men and women, I was curious as to whether or not having less explicit scenes, as they claim that they're going to have in this season of House of the Dragon compared to the original Game of Thrones, is it playing it safe? So I couldn't help but look at this article that was in Deadline about House of the Dragon, specifically talking about the intimacy coordinator, Miriam Lucia. And she talks about the show's most challenging moments, dealing with suspicion on sets, and Sean Bean's comments about sex scenes. Now, I can't help but talk about sex scenes. As you guys know, that is a passion of mine. I love talking about sex scenes. I think that it's very interesting to look and see how these sex scenes are incorporated. But most importantly, just to understand what they're doing in these sex scenes, this article is actually a pretty good article. Here, Miriam Lucia talks about being very, very busy recently on shows, specifically HBO shows here, House of the Dragon, The White Lotus, Season 2, The Nevers, and Catherine Called Birdie, and Gareth Evans' Havoc. She also seems to be working across platforms for Amazon, for HBO, etc. And she talks about how she works with everybody on the set, in the industry, in a short space of time, and the challenges on House of the Dragon. She worked on all 10 episodes during the 10-month period. And please don't judge me. Yes, I do look at jewelry from time to time and just looking. So Deadline, talks about, it's been noted about House of the Dragon that is probably as violent as Game of Thrones, but it's less explicit in terms of sexual content and nudity. What is your sense? Is that your sense too? So she says, yes, definitely. Game of Thrones had a negative reputation, which they'll admit in terms of the press. With Emilia Clarke and other actors talking about how difficult and gratuitous it could be at times and how much pressure they felt. So I think that when you get to House of the Dragon, it is not only a production team that are sensitive to that, but you get a cast that is very aware of it and careful about what they will agree to. That precedent had been set. So going into House of the Dragon, I think that the showrunners knew that they did want to make some changes in regards to explicit scenes. She goes on to say it's about finding a balance, specifically Miguel Sapochnik and Ryan Condal, for sexual content and nudity, which has to be part of this show. And I think we can all agree that this series would have to have sexual content and nudity in it. There's no way that this would have been, a show that I think would have been as effective without it. But it's part of the essence of what it is. But we're in a new era. And I was invited at the beginning to be involved in rehearsals, she says. So, and it was an open discussion because some actors, some of the older actors in particular, had never worked with an intimacy coordinator before, and it's odd for them too. They don't really know what to do or whether whether you're there to police them. I've had comments on other shows from older actors who were nervous about me being there, thinking that I'm somehow watching what they're doing. That's not my job. My job is to ensure that there's a safe environment, and that was apparent on House of the Dragon. It was very clear that the way the sex scenes were going to be approached, the way that the cast were going to be informed of what was expected of them was different. Things were not just thrown in during the shoot. Okay. So in terms, to what extent does it stretch beyond nudity and sex scenes? For example, there are some uncomfortable scenes related to underage marriage, incest, etc., the birth scene. And she says she was on set for all of those scenes and very much part of the discussion. HBO has an agreement in place that if there's any nudity or simulated sexual intercourse on their shows, then there is an intimacy coordinator expected on set. However, that's flexible in terms of scenes like the birth scene. Some directors and producers would think it's a bit of a gray area, but I would consider that an intimate scene. For example, the birth scene was very harrowing to do, but I felt that Sean was in control of that scene totally from beginning to end. She offered what she thought was right for the scene. Obviously, Miguel directed it, and he's an incredible director, and it had to be portrayed as a terrible experience for it to work. In terms of how the scene was interpreted, it was hers. The screaming, relentless agony was her. She was pretty clear there was no nudity. There could have been, but there wasn't any, which is great, to be able to suggest everything without showing it. Now, I think it's interesting that she had said to be able to suggest everything without showing nudity. And I'm going to talk about the idea of nudity, and pretty much, honestly, I think that you can show nudity and it's just a natural thing to show. But there does seem to be a sense that they want to reduce the amount of nudity they're showing. So nevertheless, Deadline goes on to say, what extent is your work with actors physical via blocking? And what extent is it mental and psychological? So she does talk about how the actor feels and consent. And then also some directors who are very clear on defined idea of what the shot is going to be, which is also important. But then also another actress, Emily Carey, who plays the queen in House of the Dragon, talked about in another article how she felt uncomfortable with her co-star, who was 30 years older than her, and there is a sex scene. So she would also deal with that. And this particular intimacy coordinator is very specific. She says, I'm an actor who is also an acting coach who became an intimacy coordinator, and I still do all three. Emily was only 18 when we did that scene in which her character is made to have sex with her much older husband. It was also about talking to Patty, who plays King Viserys Targaryen, through the whole thing and checking that he was okay. He has a child Emily's age after all. And there's this actual shot of the scene, guys, there with in which they're doing the sex scene. But Emily has talked about the sex scene. And incidentally, Sean Bean did make comments about intimacy coordinators ruining spontaneity. And there is truth to that. It may not always do it, but it can. But, you know, Lucia goes on to say that she didn't care for his comments, which is fine. But I think people know what intimacy coordinators do now. They're on the set and they are there to ensure that everybody knows what's going to happen in the scene. And that means that if you have to take your clothes off and do something nude, that the actors know that that's what's expected in the scene. So that I think is very interesting. For example, hearing from previous articles of actors who were surprised, I guess, when they got on the set, that they would be nude during certain situations in the story. So, you know, I had to kind of think about this, and it was great that they got this interview with Lucia. I think it's wonderful that she has this full disclosure where she's talking about what an intimacy coordinator does, that they have to be on set now, and why it's important in some cases. Some of the older actors are very uncomfortable doing some of these scenes as well for many reasons. But regardless, you know, I think that this is very interesting where she says you can't drag an actor screaming out of their trailer to do something they don't want to do. And this is something that I do question. And I think it's unfortunate that actors are put in a position like that. But we can clearly see that these intimacy coordinators are a great thing to have. Certainly this is going to help, you know, possibly make the industry work in a more coordinated way, in a smoother way. People will be more comfortable. But I'm kind of curious about the idea of, if you have less explicit scenes, does it mean that you're actually playing it safe? Because this is explicit type of work. It's explicit material. And there are a lot of things that are in it that I feel if you don't include or maybe exclude, perhaps you won't be able to get your point across, and we might not have a show that we're all looking forward to. So that's something that I am really concerned about. I don't know how you guys are concerned about, but I certainly am concerned about it. So to be honest with you, when I go back and I think about Game of Thrones, one of the reasons why Game of Thrones was so popular was because it had sex scenes in it. There's absolutely no denying that the sex scenes are part of the appeal of why it's popular. And I can be honest with you guys, when I watched episode 4 of House of the Dragon, that scene, specifically not the one between the uncle and the niece, but the one where she meets and manages to seduce Cole to go into her bedroom, I thought that was a very clever scene. I thought it was very realistic, very natural. They even take the time to show where she has to remove his armor very slowly, very gently. I thought it was an incredible scene. So obviously, you know, it's important, and it's always going to be an important element in this series. The books also contain scenes that have nudity in them. And, you know, honestly, does it mean that if you have an intimacy coordinator, is it playing it safe? we already saw in the article that Emilia Clarke mentioned how she felt pressured to do things. And it's too bad that anybody should feel pressured to do things. And I don't know whether I want to watch scenes knowing that somebody was pressured to do something while nude or something they didn't think they were going to be doing nude. And it also makes me wonder whether age has something to do with it as well. Emilia Clarke, I think, was 22 when she first started to do season 1 of Game of Thrones. And in House of the Dragon, Carrie is 17, which is even younger than Emilia Clarke. And she also has simulated sex scenes and also a bathing scene. That might be something that could make her uncomfortable. Carrie stated that she was 19 when she played the Queen, and having that intimacy coordinator there certainly did help her get through it. So, yeah, there are intimacy coordinators now explaining what's going to happen, and they'll be on the set. Say why, if that's the case, if the intimacy coordinators are there and they're going to explain everything and they're going to be on the set and everything, why would you need to reduce intimacy scenes, so to speak? I mean, if the scenes are written correctly and the actors know what to expect, why is having them, reduce these scenes of intimacy, which would only heighten the pleasure of watching the show, be an important element? So, I mean, technically speaking, you could do the show with less nudity. There certainly isn't an argument that says that less nudity would mean you don't have as good of a show, or even no nudity. But honestly, is there something wrong with nudity these days? Honestly, I think nudity is great to have in a show. It's an adult show, and it is a show that has nudity in it because the book has specific passages of that. And so when you lose that, it kind of loses part of the edge of it. After all, this show does deal with sort of unscrupulous machinations of these families and their desire to be leaders. And sex plays a huge role in them being able to either be a leader or not have, the power of being in charge. Over the weekend on Midnight Musings, I was asked by another PGS member who pointed out that the scene in episode 4 of the princess and her champion, Cole, having sex wasn't explicit enough. And I thought that that was very interesting. And I did respond to that viewer by saying that I thought perhaps the princess and the actress's age may be a factor. Perhaps because she is younger, she may not have been able to perform on the level that you might want to see a more explicit sex scene. And, just to kind of figure out or give a reason why it was not too explicit. But I've actually looked at that scene a few times, let's say, since I've been asked by that viewer. And I think that the scene is great. I think that for what it is, this first time between her and her champion, as I said, they very carefully and slowly remove his armor in a very direct manner. And it is very intimate, even before he finishes taking off all the armor and his clothes. They also managed to show you scenes where they didn't actually show full frontal for her necessarily. He does take her clothes off. She is the one who's seducing him. So she's kind of closed the door, didn't want him to leave the room. So there is that. So it's not a question about being sexually exploited necessarily. I know that this actress was aware that that's what was going to happen in the scene. And it's not a scene where a woman is being pressured to do a sexual act. She's the one who's seducing him. But I guess you could say perhaps maybe he wasn't sure if that intimacy coordinator wasn't there, that he would have to do a sex scene. So, it can be submissive in either direction. But I don't believe it was the case in this scene between the princess and Cole. She seduced him. She also, the character, the princess, had her eye on him from day one, so to speak. And also, this is HBO we're talking about. HBO has shown sexually explicit material in the past, and I've watched a lot of it and enjoyed a lot of it. So I don't believe, personally speaking, that there's any real reason to expect any less in regards to sex scenes, and that HBO is and has continually managed to have scenes of an explicit nature that I think are fantastic. So there is that. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention going forward has to do with other shows that also show sex scenes, explicit ones. And honestly, they're fantastic shows. One of the shows that I was going to mention, it is a fantasy show, very much like the fantasy that takes place in House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones, maybe not as violent, is a show called Outlander. Now, Outlander has sexual scenes and nudity, and it has so many sex scenes and nudity in it that I found an article um, that talks about what are the best sex scenes in it. So let me see if I can just find that one. Let's see. Entire screen. Okay, that is the wrong one. And let's see. Just trying to pull up this article for you guys. So that you can see. Well, in the Outlander article, I don't know why it's not allowing me to do it right now to share the screen for you, because I am really eager to share this screen. Let's see. In the Outlander article, it talks about what the best sex scenes are. Okay, that's why. Okay. And that is why it wasn't working. Now, incidentally enough, Outlander is a show that has not just sex scenes, but it also shows some other very violent scenes where people are fighting. And those are very explicit scenes. There was one scene where someone was in a prison cell, and while they were in the prison cell, they were pretty much told that they had to have sex with somebody or else their loved one would be killed. So Outlander does have, I would say, some very serious scenes of a sexual nature that are related to situations that can be somewhat uncomfortable. The other thing that I was going to say is Outlander is a very, very popular show. And to be honest with you, I think that Outlander is exactly the reason why it is so popular is because of these love scenes. The reason why it is so popular is because of these violent nature scenes in the show. So what I was going to say is, and I can't seem to pull up the Outlander article, but that's okay. It's essentially telling you, what the best love scenes are. And they've been some of the best on TV ever. Not because the show features the most gratuitous nudity. And then it actually says we're looking at you, Game of Thrones. It's because they're the most authentic, most emotional, and most intimate without feeling exploitative. And it's purposefully filmed with a female gaze. And I have to say, and I did mention to the last viewer that the reason why I thought that why I really enjoyed Outlander in a sense, and this scene from House of the Dragon was because it was from a female gaze. And they didn't have to do that. They could have shown it from another point of view, but clearly it is from a female gaze. So, that's something that I absolutely love. But also, they go on to the article to say, to pull it up again. Outlander is purposely filmed in the female gaze, and that's not a reference to the camera lingering on Jamie's beautiful body. So there is male and female nudity in the show, and even the sexual parts of it is based on the female perspective as to why women viewers find it so hot. So this show is Ladies of the PGS, and yes, I am going to talk about it because it does seem to cater to perhaps what women want to see, but it says it doesn't hurt that the actors who play our favorite 18th century Scotsman and his time-traveling century wife have major chemistry. And although the earlier seasons had more of our favorite passionate moments, season 4 was a little light on the promised romance. 5 and 6 on the horizon, they're hoping for more love scenes. And so I think that that's really important to mention too. I think that seeing these intimate scenes is natural. It is a fantasy show. And why can't you have fantasy about sex? I think that it was so important element of it as well in so many of these situations. Now, there is a very controversial scene that we've seen in the past. These controversial scenes would include things like assault. And we do see that and have seen that in Game of Thrones and in Outlander. Um, and I've actually spoken to other female viewers and asked what they thought about seeing that on the screen. One female viewer told me that you needed to see in context what happened to the Jamie character in Outlander in order to understand the magnitude of what he was expected to give up. And I thought that that was a very interesting answer going forward on that, because I personally have never actually seen a scene like that in my entire life. This was the first time as an adult that I had ever seen something like that. So that I felt that that was important to mention too. We are seeing sexual scenes and sexual situations that many of us perhaps haven't ever seen before, in a level of intimacy that hasn't been explored before. So there is that as well. So that is pretty much what I thought in regards to these sex scenes that we have been experiencing. And many of you are commenting in the chat about fantasy and fantasy's role in sex. It certainly is something to think about. Think about all of the times that you have seen sex and attractive individuals in fantasy novels or in films and books, even pictures, and there is a sexual element to it. There is an explicit element to it. So there is that. And that's why I was really concerned about the idea as to whether or not House of the Dragon was playing it safe. They've already admitted they're going to have less scenes of an explicit nature. And from looking at episodes 1 through 5 now, I would have to agree that there are fewer scenes. Do I think that this means that they are playing it safe? Well, I have to look at it from a certain point of view or make certain considerations. I don't know whether I would want House of the Dragon to be a carbon copy of Game of Thrones. Is it supposed to be? I don't think so. I think it's supposed to be something that is set in Westeros, but we don't necessarily want to have something that is a duplicate of what we've experienced that first time. There is a reason why Game of Thrones was the #1 show. And it does have a lot to do with the sex and other explicit scenes and the fighting scenes and the incredible writing. And it's true, people were upset with season 8. But even if you remove that from the equation, you had some incredible, scenes and incredible episodes that I'm still watching. I still go back and watch episodes of Game of Thrones. Will I go back and watch episodes of House of the Dragon? Yes, I will. I think that I wondered what House of the Dragon was going to be like when they had said that there was going to be a female lead who essentially is somebody who's battling to see if she can keep that power or the promise of a power right now. She's been promised to be the heir. Yes, there is a book, and many of you already know what the book will say or what it's going to dictate it, how it's going to end up in the future from having read the book. But the implication that she is going to be in charge is something that is very interesting. Is she going to still be able to be as free and open in this? When the princess was talking to Cole, when he asked her to, and I'm sorry guys, this is gonna be like a spoiler situation. I'm not going to go too deep into the spoilers. Let's just say that the idea of an open marriage was considered. The idea of having an open relationship was considered. And it doesn't seem like such a far-fetched idea today. In fact, there are people who are out there and are doing this right now, and that is their choice, and that's fine. But even I have to say, I was very surprised to see some tones of that in these episodes, the idea of how things were going to work out. Episode 5, which premiered last night, was amazing. It was a great episode. And I think that if they continue on this path, it's very important. And I think that this is going to be one of the best shows ever. But you can't deny that the sexual situations and the sexual complications that happened in the story is what drove us to episode 5 directly. If the main character had not gone out with her uncle and then gone ahead and had the situation where they were exposed and vulnerable in a sexual situation, I doubt that she would be getting married this soon and that things would have progressed in the story. So sometimes sexual situations are needed to go ahead and get to a point where the story can progress forward. So if I were to honestly look at this entire thing and say, do I believe that because there's less explicit scenes, either sexual or maybe even fighting scenes, that they're playing it safe? Right now, after 5 episodes, I can't truly give an answer. But as of right now, from what I've seen, I'm going to say no, they're not playing it safe. I think that they're redefining some elements in this show and the way that they want to broadcast it. Would I like more sex scenes? Yes, I would. But from the story that we're given, I'm not even quite sure whether that was even needed right now. I think that if we're going to be continuing on with this idea of sex scenes and having this cooperation on set, we also have to figure out why there would be any kind of suspicion or frustration that actors would have while they're on a set. And, ironically, we do get in situations where people are talking about trust. They're talking about the idea of going onto a set and knowing what to expect when you walk on there. I wouldn't want to show up on a set and be surprised and told that what I thought was going to happen is very different from the reality. Now, thank you, FBJ. Now, I did also want to mention that in this article, in Deadline, we do see some other points that are pretty important. And I'm going to see, I can't seem to pull it up in front of you, but I pulled it up earlier. I think that if we're going to continue on with sexually explicit scenes, why is it that there was ever a situation where people were walking onto the set and they didn't know what was going on? So I did want to mention that I think that while there is trust on one side that the actors will show up to a set and will know what they're supposed to do, there should also be a situation where the actors aren't going to be shocked or kind of like told that, oh, by the way, I know when you walked onto the set, things were one way. Guess what? We changed our minds and things are going in the opposite direction. The question is, why would that, if that were the case, if you walked on there and things had changed, now you have to kind of reevaluate yourself versus something that was, you thought that it was going to go one way. Now you're being told something else. And that's something that I didn't really see addressed in this article, because while it is true that this intimacy coordinator will talk about the implications of the scene, what I would like to know is this surprise, or at least from what they implicated, from what some of the actresses and actors are saying, that when they would show up to a set, they were surprised by what was happening. Is this still happening even with the intimacy coordinator? So perhaps it's something to think about. The last thing I was going to say is some of these actors in some of the stories that Lucia, who is the intimacy coordinator, works with, have come right out of drama school. And many of them have never done sex scenes at all. Many of them have never done roles like this. So that's something else that I am kind of curious about. And it is true, many of them are very young and they have little understanding of what might be expected of them for these scenes. And also the idea that some of the scenes might also have the director requesting a bit of spontaneity. So even despite this, spontaneity is still going to take place. And regardless of what, Lucia is saying in regards to the role of the intimacy coordinator, it is true that spontaneity is going to be used on a set. And so, I think that the stakes are incredibly high, as the article says, because I think House of the Dragon is going to become the biggest show out there. I think it's going to be as popular as, Game of Thrones. And even with the idea that this particular intimacy coordinator is confused by Sean Bean's comments about spontaneity, certainly we can understand that actors do use spontaneity in order to spur interest and intensity while filming a scene. So that is something else to think about too. And I certainly don't feel that there's any question or awkwardness for Sean Bean to, express himself saying how he feels that spontaneity is absolutely necessary and important. Um, in fact, I think that this is something that needs to be thought about or maybe readdressed in the sense because Sean Bean has been acting for a very long time. And we haven't necessarily heard a lot of actors' opinions on what they think is the most important thing when these intimacy coordinators are around. Now, thank you guys all for certainly showing up tonight for this topic. And I am kind of curious as to whether any of you think that House of the Dragon is playing it safe because they've decided to have fewer intimacy or explicit scenes in the show. I don't know if it is true that it's 100% deficient because of this. And then it makes me wonder about Game of Thrones. Certainly, I don't think any of the scenes that they had in, whether it had nudity or whether it had certain levels of, conflict and battles, were bad at all. In fact, in the first few episodes of House of the Dragon, I have heard some viewers say that they were looking to see and wondering when there was going to be combat situations. And we did. We got a situation where Damon was fighting that crab person. I don't know what he's called, but it was a fantastic fight. We also saw dragons in that scene as well. But I also think that there's that element going forward too, in regards to explicit scenes when it comes to violent situations. Now, I don't think that House of the Dragon will be the first show to confront these issues. But I also question shows that are of a sexual nature. In fact, maybe an incredibly provocative film. Will these actors be able to perform and not be in a situation where they feel they can't do it or not want to do it? Now, this is something else that I think is very interesting too. And I know acting is incredibly difficult. I'm not saying that this is an easy job to do. When you are, thank you, Apex Nerd, the crab feeder. When you are an actor, you do have to sometimes expose yourself, and not just physically, but emotionally. There's a lot of, vulnerability that gets expressed while you are doing the craft. And I admire anybody who wants to go into this profession. It is a huge sacrifice. It can be mentally and physically draining. I think that the challenge often can be, how much are you going to give of yourself? Because it is hard. Not everybody can do it convincingly. And, that whole element is one thing right there. And then now you have to add the element of sex to it, or another type of intimate scene. I have to give them kudos for the scenes that we did see when she went out with her uncle, not the ones where he was kissing her, but the other scenes of those around them when they went into sort of this house of ill repute. And, you didn't see as much. It was kind of dark. The lights were low. They could have lit that whole place up and let us see everything very, very clear. They could have done that. And I have to admit, I've seen films where, the film is the story is going on progression. And then out of nowhere, there'll be like a scene where someone stumbles into a harem or into like a marketplace, and there's a whole bunch of nude people, and it feels somewhat out of place. So as far as I'm concerned, this scene made complete sense. He had to take her out of the castle. They had to leave, she had to come on her own will, which she did. They left together. She's incognito. She still gets discovered by one or two people anyway. But that had to be something that she was drawn into willingly. But I don't think, honestly, that if she knew he was going to take her to a house of ill repute, that she would have gone with him. I think she thought maybe they were going to hang out on the town. Only God knows what happens at Westeros at night, if you know what I mean. But I just, yeah, it definitely could have been more explicit, right? Apex Nerd. I think it could have been so much more explicit. We could have seen a lot of things. We saw full male nudity. Now, I'm not going to lie. I really liked seeing that. Surprise. I like to see nude scenes where men are completely nude in them. So I've said it. Yes, I am not any different, I think, from any other woman out there or from men who like to see men. I think it's totally fine to see that. I thought that was a very nice scene where the person was kind of just sitting down comfortably, getting ready, getting ready for that. Now, Sander, the scene that I'm talking about, stumbling into that, happened in a movie called the Conan remake with Momoa. And the scene itself was very jarred. It didn't roll into it. So, for example, it made sense that that Damon took his niece and they saw sort of, a skit where the local people were pretending to be, the upper class, and they were saying, I have a dragon, and they kind of made fun of everyone. And then there was even a scene where this man pulls out a penis from his pants. It's actually rope that looked like a penis. That's a sexually explicit scene, but it made sense in the context of what we were watching and perhaps was foreshadowing of what we were going to see later on in the episode, right, guys? So you got a taste of that. Oh, look, he's pulling out this artificially shaped penis. It was a rope or whatever it was fashioned as. It was very big. And it was meant to be jarring. It's made big on purpose. It was meant to be jarring, and it was meant to shock the princess. And I think, well, it didn't, I don't know if it shocked the princess, but it shocked me because I wasn't expecting that to happen, which was great. It was a great scene. But then once he got her comfortable with the idea of seeing something like that, then he knew he could progress on to something else, like maybe an area where people were drinking and it was more brothely. And then, then after that brothel scene, then they go into that area where people can pretty much get what they want, love for sale, so to speak, or you point to the pictures on the wall on what you want, which we've seen in a lot of period shows. Now, with this being said, it is something to think about. We have a few more episodes of House of the Dragon, and they have plenty of opportunities to have sexual situations. We saw two men kissing I'm not going to say where, but we did see that in some of the show as well. Women kissing. There was a lot of, I'd say, tasteful points where it was put in. But if we hadn't seen that brothel scene, I don't think we would have seen as many nude people. And in the past, in Game of Thrones, we've seen, much more nudity. And I thought that the nudity is beautiful. So my closing comments on this is this. I think that nudity is wonderful. I think the human body is a beautiful thing to behold. And I don't think that there's going to be a situation in House of the Dragon where there could be too much nudity. I think nudity can be used in a story to make the story go forward. And we have seen the sex in this story that made the story go forward, that made it progress, and it made sense. When she got back that night and she was with Cole, people did see her on the street, which was the plan. It was a setup in a sense, and it did progress the story forward. So there was that. Next week, I'm going to talk a little bit about House of the Dragon episode 5, because I have a feeling that there are some people who have not seen this episode. So I'm not going to spoil it. It was just last night, about 24 hours ago, guys. So certainly check it out if you haven't. But I should say that, yes, Sander, you're talking about the series Rome, which was also, I believe, on HBO. And Polly Walker was completely nude, full frontal in that. So things may be different now that they are switching actresses, guys. And did you not notice that we didn't really see very much nudity from the two young girls, Alicent and the princess? We didn't see as much nudity of them. And it might have to do with their age or something that they're just not comfortable in showing, saying we don't have to show everything in this scene. So there is that. I am curious as to how things are going to play out when they are changing actresses. Now, I did mention something, and this is probably what I'm going to close with. to that viewer who asked me about whether or not the scene was good enough. And I'd said she was a young girl, she may not have that much experience. Let's give her some, let's not pressure her too much because maybe she doesn't know everything else that could be done. But I don't know if that was true or not. That's just an option. And I don't know the answer to that. Could it have been more explicit when she was with Cole? I think it was good enough. Honestly, I think if I could have had one wish, and that one was just for the scene to be longer. Um, so I love these intimate scenes where people are intimate for long periods of time. I like it to last longer. So, with that being said, I just wanted to thank you all for stopping by to listen to my thoughts on whether House of the Dragon is playing it safe with reducing those explicit scenes. Let's see what happens in the next few episodes. Will there be more explicit scenes? It's not going to be as many as Game of Thrones, but so far I am loving what I'm seeing, guys. I think they're doing a beautiful job, and only God knows what is going to happen in the next episodes. I did also just want to mention to you guys that after I end this stream, I'm going to be on the Six Scale Cantina with Aries Tarrington on the Market Show. We're going to be talking Star Wars, guys. As I said, Andor is coming up on Wednesday. 3 episodes are dropping on that. Is it going to be darker and grittier? I am curious as to what you guys think too. There's so much more to talk about in the next episode of Ladies of the PGS. I want to thank my moderator, Tom Jr. Jackson, for helping me. Guys, you are the best. We are all goof people, right, Tom Jr. Jackson? Guys, the PGS is one of the best communities out there. I am so honored to be able to stream and talk to you all. Certainly hope you enjoy the rest of your night. It's such a pleasure to see the community. And everybody, no matter where you are out there, always remember to be kind. Take care, everybody.